Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my bookshelves because sometimes I worry that they get lonely. Today I am talking about book 1 in Justin Call's Silent Gods series, Master of Sorrows. I'm going to put up a picture of the actual cover because this is an ARC copy. Some quick disclaimers before we start. Yes, I was sent an ARC copy of this book for free quite some time ago now. Nonetheless, all opinions are my own. Nobody's paying me to talk about books. I'm also going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. I don't think there are going to be any spoilers in this. Lastly, just a reminder that I filmed this series quite far in advance, so it may be that by the time this goes up, the second book is already out, so if stuff doesn't add up for you, I haven't read the sequel yet. Master of Sorrows came out in February of 2019. It was Justin Call's debut book, his adult fantasy debut. As far as I am aware, the second book, which I think is called Master Artificer, comes out in February of 2021. That's all I know about it. So the sequel is probably out by the time you're watching this. Who's Justin Call? He's an author, he's also a game designer, and this was his debut, so there's not much else I need to say at this point, but I will link his website if you want to find out more. The main character in Master of Sorrows is a boy called Anev. He's actually called Einavog. We had to get Justine to look it up in the audiobook, but he's called Anev in most of the book. Anev is born with one hand missing, which in this world means he is set to be cast out, basically left out for the wolves. But Anev is rescued from this fate. He's secretly given a prosthetic limb, a magical prosthetic limb, and then he's taken to this academy where they train to become the guardians of magical artifacts. So these are the people, they sometimes go out into the world and take magical artifacts and bring them back. Anev is desperate to pass the tests to become one of these guardians, but things go slightly awry when he begins to realise that his ideologies and the ideologies he's been brought up with don't necessarily align with those of the Order. To quote the summary, will he finally embrace the doctrine of his tutors, murder a stranger and abandon his mentor, or will he accept the more difficult truth of who he is and the darker truth of what he may become? So there's a lot of stuff about kind of destiny and whether he's destined to become a villain, all of this stuff, prophecy, that kind of thing. It's that fantasy jam. For those who enjoy a good old-fashioned training montage, this book is for you. I'd say the coolest moments of this story are where we have Anev involved in these various tests and challenges to become a guardian. There are some really great descriptions of the things they have to do and how these tests are set up, and it all feels like it should have really dramatic rock music in the background. So if you're here for some action sequences, I think you will have a good time. I will confess, I find that the first half of this book drags a little bit. I think, though, that's because there is so much setup to be done in this book. Not only do we have to be introduced to this order and this goal of becoming a guardian that Anev has, but also his life outside of the academy with his mentor. We also have to learn a lot about the scripture and mythology, a lot of which intentionally contradicts itself. While that's kind of a negative, I think my pro is that once a lot of that is set up, this book really speeds up. The last 100 pages or so got me so excited. At one point I was thinking about unhauling this because I was like, why have I kept this? I can't really remember what happened. And then I reread it, and those last 100 pages, the setup for book 2 is so strong that I have hung on to it because I am so excited for the prospect of the second book. While Anev is a young male protagonist in a fantasy book, which automatically starts him off on a bit of an off foot with me, that's just the way I am, he does not suck. Yes, he does moon about a bit and he has confused goals, but the same can be said for a lot of female protagonists in fantasy. What I like about Anev is that he intentionally questions his reality. And while quite often he doesn't get the right conclusions from that questioning, you still really understand why he's got to the place he's got to. Yes, he does have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to certain aspects of the story. He's a teenage boy, and as teenage boy protagonists go, he's not the worst. I think a lot of the mythology and the magic and the magical artifacts are really cool in this story as well. There's a lot of richness to the story. There's just a lot to take in. And so I've already mentioned that that start is quite slow, and I think that will put a lot of people off. I am hoping that by the time this video goes up, I will either be reading or will have read the second book and might even have a review for it up because time travel is weird. And I think together it's going to make a really strong, really complete series. This is just one of those books with a lot of setup. My other con is this is quite a sheltered community and there are very few women in this book that we meet as characters. There are other women around. This isn't, Boy Island, but the women that we do meet, we don't meet for very long. Again, that's something that I think I'm going to wait and see what happens in later books before I pass judgment, because there is one character that I'm hoping we will get a lot more from in the follow-up books. Just a content warning of sorts, this is a world where if you have any kind of physical deformity, it's seen as a really bad thing. It's a sign that you are marked by the bad god and you're not doing well and they should leave you out for the wolves. This book pushes against that idea quite strongly. It's not saying, and that is what we should all think in this world. In fact, a lot of the book is about pushing against these negative ideologies. I also think that's something that's going to be pushed against even more as this story goes on and we see more of Anev in the world. But if that is something that you really don't want to read, or you need to be in the right mood to read, or if that's something that affects you personally, maybe give this one a miss or read it with that mindset on. This is a debut, and as you can tell, I'm really excited about follow-up books in this series, and I was thinking about what other books I might compare this to, or what other epic fantasy I would recommend to people. One of them is the Poppy War series by R.F. Kuang. I think this is such a good series, and it has similar... The main character is sort of destined for something potentially negative, and I think that's a really interesting angle that's explored in that series from start to finish. That's also a finished series, so I can tell you about it, and I won't say, maybe wait for the second book. I also bring this up pretty much whenever I talk about epic fantasy, but the Chorus of Dragons series by Jen Lyons is a really, really great series that I think has equal amounts of kind of prophecy and mythology and various people destined to do various things. Should you read this? I'm kind of hoping that at this point future me will swoop into the comments or the description or somewhere and tell you whether or not book 2 was worth reading, and therefore whether you should read book 1. It's always the difficulty with reviewing the first book in a series. Suffice to say, I do think this is a really strong start. As I say, it's got a slow pace at the beginning, there is so much stuff to set up, but now I'm hoping that we'll be able to go on at a pace and just get this really interesting story out. If it's anything like the last 100 pages of this book, we're in for a real treat. This was a quick one. I didn't have a huge amount to say because obviously I'm saving my judgment for the second book, but this does bring us to... Does this bring us to the end? Brown, call, yes. This brings us to the end of all of my filming for the first series of Overbooked. So exciting. So good to be done with the first shelf. All complete. I don't know when Series 2 will start going up. It may be that it goes on immediately, but you'll find out because you're in the future and you're watching this. Please do comment below with any recommendations for books featuring villainous characters, morally grey characters. It's some of my favourite kind of fiction. Plonk those in the recommendations, plonk those in the comments below. While you're down there, you can also follow me on all of my social media. That's linked below. If you haven't already, you can subscribe because it makes me feel loved and appreciated. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Why are you not? There we go. No. But now I am hoping that we will be...